Hello everybody, hope you guys are having a good morning. I want to start off by actually just telling y'all to pause the video and just compare answers on your homework. Make sure you guys are all on the same page. So take a few minutes, just compare your homeworks and make sure you guys understand it. Pause the video, and when you're done with that, come back please. Okay, now that you had a chance to take a look at your homework, we're going to talk about the FRQs that you're assigned for today. So I want you to do the FRQs number 1 and number 2. And there's a couple things that we need to talk about. First of all, I've mentioned before on the exam there are 6 FRQs. The first 2 allow calculators. And so I always try to include the question number so you can tell whether or not it is a calculator question. So for example, this first FRQ is definitely a calculator question. You're allowed to use your calculator. Now, in this problem, you are asked to estimate W prime. And this is something our book doesn't cover. And so we need to talk about it. So let's say that I wanted to find W prime of 2. So this is not W prime, this is W, right? So W prime will be the derivative of W. It'll be the slope of W. But I don't have t equal 2. And even if I did, how could I find the slope at a single point? And so we have to estimate. This is literally an estimation procedure. All right. And what we do, as maybe you've already guessed, is we're going to do the slope between the 2 nearest points. And so W prime of 2 will be approximately, right? Because anytime you see the word estimate, you're not going to use equal signs. You're going to use this kind of stuff. And then I've got to show the reader what I'm doing. So 57.1 minus 55 over 4 minus 0. That's just y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1, right? And then I will plug this into my calculator. And when I do that, I get 0.525. And we need units. And so since this is, dy dx, right, y units over x units, and so it is degrees Fahrenheit over minutes. Okay? So the problem that you're going to get is going to be similar but different. All right? But that's the way we do it, is we do the slope of the 2 points that are around whatever we're looking for. So in my case, I was looking for W prime of 2. So I had to use the 0 and the 4. The next thing that we need to talk about is how to interpret derivatives, and specifically how to interpret second derivatives. And so we're just going to create kind of a silly example, but I think it will accomplish our purpose. So let's create a function. We're going to call it h of t, and we're going to say that it is not equal to x, equal to t squared. Okay? And now h is total number of hot dogs eaten after t minutes. Okay? I know, it's ridiculous because it means that in 3 minutes somebody would eat 9 hot dogs. Seems a little ridiculous, but whatever. Anyway, that's what h is. So if I ask you to find h prime of 2 and interpret that in the context of the problem, then what am I asking you to do? Well, the h prime of 2 is not too hard, right? We can pretty quickly see that h prime of t is 2t, and so h prime of 2 would be 4. But what does that mean in the context of the problem? Well, let's start off by identifying what the units of h prime are. What is this? For what? I know we have said from the beginning that anytime that we see the word rate, that means we're dealing with a derivative. And it also means that our units will have division in them, right? So in this case, it is, my y units over my t units, and so it is hot dogs per minute. And so if I want to interpret h prime of 2 equal to 4, this means that at 2 minutes, the rate at which hot dogs are being eaten is 4 hot dogs per minute. So that's just a straight interpretation of what your derivative tells you about your function, right? So what if we were a little bit more vague? What if all we knew was this? What if we knew that h prime of 2 was positive? How would we answer that question? What does that mean in context? So let me ask this. If we say h prime of 2 is positive, would you agree that this means h is increasing? Right? Is that a true statement? If h prime of 2 is positive, then h is increasing. All right. This is exactly how we interpret it. But I can't say h. I have to say what h actually is in words. And what is h? H is the total number of hot dogs eaten. So what I say is, instead of h is increasing, I say the number of hot dogs eaten is increasing. Right? H is increasing. H is increasing. Okay? We just follow that format. So that's the first derivative. But what if I instead get asked this? What if I'm given that h double prime of 2 is greater than 0? So second derivatives can be a little trickier to interpret because they can be confusing. Think about when we talk about position, velocity, and acceleration, right? If I tell you, velocity is positive, that makes sense to people. But when you start trying to explain what acceleration means to position, it's confusing. It's not too hard to talk about acceleration and how it's affecting velocity. In other words, when we try to interpret the second derivative, we don't want to use it to talk about the original function. Let's instead use it to talk about the first derivative, right? So in this case, if h double prime of 2 is positive, this implies that h prime is increasing. Agreed? Right? If the second derivative is positive, then the first derivative is increasing. And so we're going to follow the exact same plan that we did here. We said h is increasing, and then we just replaced h with what the words are that mean h. So what are the words that describe h prime? Right? We know that h prime is a rate, right? And so h prime is the rate at which hot dogs are eaten in hot dogs per minute. And so we can say, really very simply, the rate at which hot dogs are eaten is increasing. Where this right here is a verbal description of H prime, the rate at which hot dogs are eaten. So that's how to handle the second derivative. If you're asked to interpret the second derivative, you use it to explain what H prime is doing, what the first derivative is doing. All right, so if H double prime is positive, that means H prime is increasing. And then just figure out what the words are that describe H. Okay, I think that's really enough for you guys to get started on these two FRQs and do them. They are both calculator FRQs. You can tell by they're both question number 1. It probably wouldn't hurt to remind you that average rate of change is the slope of the endpoints. Okay, that's going to show up. But otherwise, go ahead and get to work on these things. Try, as always, to do as much on your own as you possibly can. And only if you absolutely cannot move forward, talk to somebody else. But really try to be independent, because that is where the learning goes on. Good luck, and we'll talk to you tomorrow.